guys. This week we speak to Miss Catriona Boffard. She's a clinical sexologist and a psychotherapist and a sexuality researcher. And this week we take off sexual awareness and freedom with her. We thank her so much for her time. I forgot to press record, so you missed the beginning, but here we go. So could you tell me about you and what you do and how long you've been a sexologist for?
Sure. So I'm a clinical sexologist and a psychotherapist. I have been practicing in that capacity for the last 9 years. And the work that I've done over the last 9 years has involved helping individuals and couples to kind of move forward and progress through any difficulties that they're facing in their sexual experience, with their sexual orientation, with kind of any kind of intimacy difficulties. But I've also in the last 9 years spent a lot of time educating, lecturing, presenting talks and workshops, because I'm particularly passionate about education and creating sex positive conversation, which I don't think we have enough of even in 2020. And you know, being a sexologist, which, you know, in America we're called a sex therapist. In the United Kingdom, I'm called a psychosexual therapist. Sometimes it's seen as quite a glamorous job. I know that there's some television shows that have kind of glamorized the idea of a sex therapist. It is not that glamorous at all. It's actually really hard work, and it takes a long time to get here. I mean, I'm going into my 9th year of studying now, at the end of this year. So it takes a long time to get to being able to sit in front of a client or a couple, and actually help them therapeutically with difficulties that they're facing in their sex life. And I think it's important for me to say that the reason I see so many people and that my practice is so full, and I know my colleagues have the same concern or the same issue, is because people are not speaking about this enough. And when we do speak about it, we're not speaking about it in a sex positive way. So I continue to do what I'm doing, hopefully for another, I was about to say 90, but I'll be long dead by then. One hopes. No, I'll continue to do this for as long as I can, because I think that there's a real need to continue having conversations like the ones that I have daily with my clients.
Right. That actually leads me to my very first question. Like I wanted it to be for people who at least like from 12 upwards, kind of safe in that way. So how does one become a clinical sexologist? Like, what do you do in terms of high school and university? What did you do?
You know, I don't think you wake up one morning as a child or a teenager and you go, oh, I want to be a clinical sexologist when I grow up. And I know that certainly wasn't my aspiration. I thought I was going to be a teacher. I had some aptitude tests that told me to be an occupational therapist, so I'm not hugely far off. But this actually kind of happened to me in a strange way, in that I realized sort of in my final year of undergraduate, I was studying psychology because I didn't know what else to study. I was never one of those kids that went to university with a set plan of knowing what I was going to do, and used my schooling subjects wisely to prepare for that. No, I mean, I did home economics at school. That was like, you know, a long time ago. Was really unhelpful, you know, for my career. So anyway, so it had nothing to do with that. If you're wanting to go into this field, though, and you're in school, what I would highly recommend is biology. Biology, I think, is crucial, actually. And then actually, as strange as it might sound, history is really important. We need to have a historical and cultural understanding of human beings, because I think it encompasses a big part of the job that I do. So if you're a school goer, I would say history and biology are really, really important. But then at university, the clinical sexology title, clinical means that I'm client-facing. Sexology is an umbrella term. It could refer to a doctor, a psychologist, a nurse, a public health worker, a researcher. But being a sexologist, you may have one or many of those foundations, and mine is in psychology and in research. So you don't go to university and immediately study sexology. There is nowhere that you can do that, and it's not possible. You have to be able to go and do your medicine degree, your medical degree first, or your psychology degree first, your nursing degree, public health. and so on. And then once you've done that and you are, registered as a psychologist, registered as a doctor, registered as a nurse, then you will go off and specialize in sexology or sexual health. And unfortunately, there isn't anywhere in South Africa at a tertiary level that is accredited and reputable to study sexology, which is a real pity and something that we're really hoping to change. But if you are So the option is to go overseas, and that requires obviously time and resources. And I feel very fortunate I had an opportunity to do that, like some of the other sexologists in South Africa. But the majority of people working in sexual health in this country have not actually been able to study it. They've had to learn through experience and through organizations like SASHA, which is the Southern African Sexual Health Association.
I saw them.
Doing online workshops, or now it's online, obviously. Doing workshops and short courses with them is the best way for you to learn. So you've got to start with your foundation, and then once you've done that foundation in an applicable career, and you've got your accreditation or you've got your registration, then you're going to go off and specialize in sexology. And as I said, this isn't just you get that degree, then you study sexology and you're done. You learn far more from working in the field and from experience. So it's not something that happens overnight. It's a long process. So often when people do get hold of me to say they're interested in becoming a sex therapist, I always respond to the same thing. Are you sure you know what this entails? Because it isn't an overnight or a 1 or 2 year thing. I mean, as I said, I'm going into year 9 now, and I will never stop learning, because I think in this field it's always evolving. You can't ever stop learning.
That's very true. Thank you so much. And so, being a sexologist, what exactly is sexuality? Like we hear this term a lot, and I mean, especially I think in the recent last 10 years, there's been a lot of focus on sexuality. What exactly is sexuality?
So for me, I look at sexuality as it encompasses a bunch of different experiences that we can have, from sexual behaviors to sexual orientations to fantasies to pleasures. But it really is around everything and anything that happens for us as a human being that involves sex. And so it could be who we are sexually as a person, our identity, who we are attracted to, our orientation, who we have sex with, the behavior that we engage with, the fantasies that we have, the pleasures that we experience, the thoughts that we have. I think that the term sexuality is actually so hard to understand and so hard to give a clear-cut definition to. And I often get asked this question, and I still to this day don't think that there is a clear-cut answer, because it can mean one thing to you and another thing to me. So for anyone or any of your listeners, I think sexuality has anything and everything to do with you personally and your experience and ideas and thoughts around sex.
Right. Thank you very much. So yeah, this term being really broad, I get that a lot. I've been reading and researching quite a lot about this. So what are the factors, or what are the things that will affect or inform our sexuality, the way we see things, our sexual behaviors, our preferences and things like that? What besides the biological, social and psychological factors that I've read about?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, that's the premise for studying sexology, is that you have to understand human beings from a biopsychosocial perspective. But I think there are 2 or maybe 3 elements there that are actually missing, which is religion, culture, and intellect. And I think that the biological obviously is very important. The psychological is important, and the social, let me tell you, is probably one of the most crucial, because the environment that we grow up in, I believe, nurture, much more than I believe in nature, has the biggest impact on us. But we can't rule out how great of an impact religion has on us, and our religious teachings or religious lessons that we're exposed to early on in life or throughout life. Culture has a massive impact on us, culture and community. And when I talk about intellect, knowledge, the knowledge that we have or that we don't have. For me, these kind of 6 things all make up who we are in our own sexuality. And so that is why I struggle to answer the question of what is sexuality, because your sexuality and those 6 factors will be completely different to mine. I mean, my brother's sexuality will be completely different to mine, even though we were brought up in the same environment by the same parents. The intellectual sort of experience of sexuality will be different. The behavioral experience of sexuality will be different. So there are so many different factors that are going to influence it. But as I said, and I think I want to reiterate, I really believe that it's nurture far more than nature when it comes to sexuality.
All right. Thank you very much. So again, on the sexuality part, sexual awareness, again, another term that has recently been used quite a lot. And I mean, especially in terms of the LGBTQ plus community, what exactly is sexual awareness? Like, where does that fit in terms of the big, broad term of sexuality?
Gosh, I think you will struggle to have sexual awareness without curiosity. So for me, they go hand in hand. In order to create sexual awareness, we have to be curious about what our sexuality is, what it's made up of, who we are, what we like. And unfortunately, we don't get given the green light as kids, as adolescents, as young adults, even sometimes as adults, to explore, to be curious, to question. And so I think with sexual awareness, unfortunately, very often our curiosity gets shut down from a very early age. I mean, we're talking like toddlers who just discover parts of their bodies, like their penis or their vulva, and suddenly realize that this feels nice, and it immediately gets shut down. Don't take your hands out your pants. Don't do that. It's bad. So immediately, this awareness that could be created around sex and sexuality is deemed bad, shameful, wrong, embarrassing. Don't do it, So I think that sexual awareness is impossible without curiosity, but we have to recognize that there's a long-standing view of sexual pleasure that is negative. And obviously the narrative around sex has changed greatly, obviously, in the last however many years, and it continues to change, but it hasn't changed enough. It's still, every single new client that walks through my doors, it's a lesson in sexual awareness, because it's a lesson in giving my clients the right knowledge and education about sex that I would almost say 9 times out of 10 were never given, and giving them permission to be curious in order to get sexual awareness.
I like that you said curiosity and permission, because I spoke about how we're told that when we're little, you're a little toddler, or you're someone who's like 8 or 9 years old, and you're fiddling with yourself and someone catches you and they say no, and how that in itself is somehow a small trauma that you take with you, because then you see your body and sex is bad and ugly and shameful, and the shame that you carry. So that was really important. Thank you very much.
Yeah, sure.
And so I saw that you do quite a lot with women empowerment, or I'm not sure what the correct term was that I had read. So what exactly do you do in terms of like, how does one empower a woman? Like, I know you spoke about permission. So what do you do in terms of that?
Well, I mean, permission is the very, very first step. I'm probably really passionate about this because I do identify as a woman. I am a woman. But I think even more so because what I've encountered in my years in practice, and actually one of the reasons I got into this field, is I realized there was a real paucity of discussion around female sexuality. I used to hear adverts on the radio on 702 when I was at varsity a very long time ago, driving to varsity in the mornings, on erectile dysfunction and erectile dysfunction medication. Cool, normalizing male sexual arousal and sexual pleasure. But nothing about women. And so, the first time I heard the term vaginismus, which is a female sexual pain disorder, or anorgasmia, which is it is the term we use for men and women, but anorgasmia in women is women not having an orgasm, not being able to achieve an orgasm when they want to have one. It baffled me that we didn't have the type of conversations around female sexuality like we did so openly, like on the radio at 8 o'clock in the morning, like we did for male sexuality. So the work that I do is just kind of yes, because I'm a woman, and has kind of naturally led me that way. But I've just realized that there's so much, I think, so much more shame, stigma, embarrassment, and lack of conversation around female pleasure and sexuality. Yeah. And so in working to empower women, yes, the number one thing is to give them permission, because no one ever gives us permission. Like I said, you hear the advert on the radio for men, or, it's fine, men or all guys masturbate when, all teenage boys masturbate. It's something that we hear. You don't ever hear that about girls. You don't hear that about women. Women do too. It's completely normal. Masturbation is a completely normal part of our sexual development as human beings. And so for me, it starts with permission and education. I think education, again, is so lacking, and we really need to be able to change the way that we speak about sex, both at home or at school or within community settings, in order to prepare us for what sex actually looks like, what it really is. And the thing that really fascinates me is that all of the conversations around sex with women, well, not all of them, majority of them leave off the idea of pleasure for women. I think that that's a big deal, and that's something that needs to change. So in the empowerment kind of stance that I take, it's more about getting women more in touch with themselves sexually, getting them to realize and recognize they're entitled to sexual pleasure as much as their male counterparts have been, as they've been told or heard, or and actually that it's quite normal, it's okay, and it's actually a very nice and exciting thing too.
So in the whole woman empowerment thing, I know that we see a lot of self-love, and so I was just wondering, this self-love and in terms of masturbation and getting to know yourself, because when I speak with my friends about sex and things like that, I always say, I think it would be I don't know, a positive thing or good thing if you yourself knew yourself in terms of your body, what you like, your erogenous zones, I think it's the term. And then instead of going out there and having sex and then just laying there expecting a man to know what's happening, when you don't know yourself either. And I don't know if that's the right thing. I've been talking nonsense to my friends. I'm so sorry if I have. But I just think that this self-love and masturbation, do you think they go hand in hand?
Well, you have been saying the right thing to your friends, so you don't have to worry that you've been spewing out like incorrect information. No, what you've been saying is spot on. Yes, absolutely. I think that, masturbating is an act of self-love, because there are hundreds of reasons why we have sex with somebody or we masturbate, and there was a study done in 2003 that found 237 reasons why. And because I want to bring myself pleasure is just one of them. And I think it is an act of self-love or self-care. But I think what's important to kind of emphasize when it comes to female sexuality and sexual pleasure is that female sexual pleasure is a learned experience. Unfortunately, for men, sometimes it seems on the outset, or from the outside, should I say, it seems pretty straightforward. It seems pretty easy that they can just get aroused and feel like it and touch their penis and, stimulate themselves and bring themselves to orgasm. For women, it's a learned experience. You actually have to experiment. You actually have to explore. Exactly. And you've got to do that either on your own, which I always encourage, or if that is not possible for whatever reason, with a partner. Because if you're not aware of what it is that you like, and you're always putting your partner's sexual needs before your own, it isn't exactly an act of self-love. It's it's the opposite of that. It's
doing
always
a disservice to yourself.
Exactly. You're always going to put somebody else's needs before your own. So for me, masturbation is great, it's important, it's normal, it's natural, but it is actually a way of getting to know yourself better as a sexual being.
So in that and the whole men and women thing, do you think that this term virginity is a construct of society, or I'm not sure what the phrase is completely. Do you think that has any truth behind it? I mean, I've heard it a lot. Do you think it's any truthful at all?
Absolutely. I think it's a massive problem to talk about when I lost my virginity or that I'm still a virgin. So yes, I think it's a social construct. I think we obviously have religious underpinnings to it as well, which comes with shame and feeling like I've sinned or done something wrong. And my colleague, Dr. Karen Gurney, in her book Mind the Gap, uses a lovely term, your sexual debut. When was your sexual debut? And when I ask my clients in the very first session, when was the first time you had sex, I never say, when did you lose your virginity? But I also have to clarify and say, when I say sex, I don't mean intercourse. I'm like, when did you first engage in some kind of sexual activity with somebody? Because that is actually part of our sexual debut. That's when we begin our journey into exploring and understanding ourselves sexually. So yes, absolutely. I 100% feel that the idea of sexual of virginity is a social construct. I wish we could do away with those words, and you'll never hear me using them in my practice with my clients.
All right, thank you. I don't know if you've ever heard about clitoris.
Yeah, somewhat, yes.
Yeah, and what I love about clitoris is not just the phrase that says the hole is not the hole in terms of the vaginal canal where penis is inserted, is the hole. And I like that because in there they also say they like the way we measure our GDPs in our countries, we should also try and measure the orgasms between men and women, because what I read is that like almost, I think it's 60% of women don't always reach orgasm during sex or sexual activities.
81%.
81, oh my word, even more. And to men. So this number that we should try and even the playing field in terms of orgasms to women and to men. So I just thought that was interesting. But then how would we, I think obviously awareness, and also permission, like you said, giving yourself permission to explore and being curious. How else do we get a population of women to come in to the other side of, hey, explore yourself, love yourself a bit more, like masturbate, do all of those things?
It's not an easy task. I think that actually at a grassroots level, it would work if we could change the generational conversation. So instead of mom telling daughter that sex is bad, you mustn't do it, and you only have sex with your husband, who knows if she's going to be gay or straight or bi or queer, who knows? We change that conversation. So mom tells her daughter, sex is something that happens between two people who have feelings for each other or attracted to each other. You must only have sex with somebody if you say you want to have sex with them, or if they say they want to have sex. We do a consent thing. There's so many layers to it, and I don't think it's worth getting into all the little nitty-gritty details now. But I think that we would have to change how the messages around sex are passed down from generation to generation. Because what I see in my practice is that you'll see grandmother told mom told daughter tells her daughter, and so on. And so we just keep passing these messages down. And the wonderful thing that always gives me goosebumps is when I'm working with a client and I can see as a woman in particular, I can see their perception of sex change from what they've always believed. They've kind of unlearned and rewired the way that they think about sex, and I can see then it's going to change the way they talk to their kids about sex. So for me, that's one of the first places to start. But we also have to start talking about this more, because it's quite a normal thing in our lives. Yes. I have this big thing, a big point that I always like to make is that we all do it, we just don't talk about it. And so if we're all just doing it and having certain experiences or seeing certain experiences on porn or movies that are quite far from the truth, we are not actually able to normalize the fact that it's not common for a woman to have an orgasm during sexual intercourse, actually, because anatomically she doesn't get the right sort of stimulation, and if her brain is not engaged, if she's not utilizing her brain to heighten her sexual arousal and engaging it in the sexual experience, either by focusing on the touch or by fantasizing, it's going to be really hard to orgasm. But women don't know that. And I just like you were like, what, 81%? it's 2020 and I'm still getting that reaction a decade later from, this research was released not so long ago, but even before then we knew these sorts of numbers. Mm-hmm. So that idea of the orgasm gap is frustrating because I think there's a lack of lacking sense of entitlement to pleasure for women. I really think women need to believe that they're entitled to pleasure. And they need to be responsible for their own pleasure in the sense of, if they're with their partner and their partner's, touching their clitoris till the cows come home and it feels fantastic, she's not engaging her brain, which is our biggest sex organ, you're going to have a very, very difficult time. So as women, we have to play the part in getting the pleasure that we want, but also changing the way that we share with our friends, our family members about this topic that we all do, we just don't talk about.
Yeah, that's so true. And in literacy as well, they spoke about how the anatomy of the clitoris is only found, the full anatomy of the clitoris is only found like 29 years ago, if I'm not mistaken.
2005.
And that it's actually bigger than what we think the little nub is on the top. Like it's much bigger. And I just found, wow, erectile dysfunction has been on the market, I'm sure, for much longer than the full clitoris anatomy has even been found. And I was just very astounded at the fact that this male, I don't want to say hierarchy, but it's just from history. I feel like from what we've known, from what we see in society and school and things like that, we've just known that men have always been on top of this so-called hierarchy scale thing. And then also in terms of pleasure, a male happens to be on top, and then at the bottom is the female, or rather the second thought is the female. So then how, again, how does one, if I was in a heterosexual relationship, how would you try and, because men are sexual beings, or they are seen, but women are too, and like you said, give themselves permission. But then how do we, I don't know, say if we can ever balance the fact that male sexuality is in such a big thing and females are only now coming out recently and saying, hey, I have sexuality and I'm proud and I'm a prowess and I'm sexy goddess and things like that. But how then, in terms of like in our households, can we, I don't know, I feel like it's very patriarchal, the idea even of sexuality, because we get a lot of men trying to be misogynist, or just in general, not even trying. And then that kind of hampers our sexuality, or where we have to hide it, or we can't fully express ourselves.
It's really difficult. And I think, coming back to what I said about what influences our sexuality, we can't avoid the fact that culture and religion play a huge role in the heteronormative perspective that we have on sexuality. And unfortunately, there are many cultures that will always view the male in the more dominant, authoritative, entitled position. I mean entitled in the sense of feeling there is an entitlement to pleasure and an entitlement to sex. So I think, it is really challenging. In order to change that, you're having to go and change cultural norms and societal norms, and that's hard. So for me, it's less about trying to do that and more about just working with one person at a time to try and shift something. And, I think there's so many beliefs that we as a society hold around sex that are heteronormative, patriarchal, unhelpful, that favor male pleasure. I mean, even biology lessons in school favor male pleasure. Penis goes into vagina, male ejaculates, there's the male pleasure. Where's the female pleasure? It's actually fascinating, talking about the clitoris. It was actually discovered in I'm going to get the numbers wrong, that sometime in the 1800s by a male physician, but it was not documented, and it was not researched and written about until a female scientist in 2005, which is 15 years ago, wrote about it. So even in textbooks, in anatomy textbooks, they often leave off the clitoris. In diagrams, sorry, not anatomy textbooks, in like diagrams for kids or biology diagrams, they leave off the clitoris. It's like, there goes female pleasure out the window. So, it's a massive it's a massive task to try and change the way that we as a society view sex. Porn doesn't help.
Yeah.
Porn perpetuates all of the myths about sex. I think it's important for me to emphasize to your listeners that porn is acting. Porn stars are hired on the size and look of their genitalia. So it's acting. Porn doesn't happen like it does in the movies. I just wish that I don't know if you've seen the series Sex Education on Netflix.
Yes, I have.
It's the greatest show, and I'm not saying that just because of what I do. I think it's just wonderful and hysterical. But for once, there's actually a show that depicts the things that we really go through. Erectile dysfunction, premature ejaculation, vaginismus, the sexual pain, sexual assault, trauma, abortion, real life things, not this penis in vagina, pounding hard, she has 5 screaming orgasms and then he climaxes on her face. Like that is very unlikely in a sexual experience. Very unlikely from so many different angles. So yes, so much has to change, but if we can just change one person's view of it at a time, my hope is that person, and this is also what I hear with my clients, which makes me really happy, that person goes and tells their friends, and those friends go and tell those friends. So starting with one person, that's what it's all about for me.
All right. Then that kind of goes in with the last point of embracing each other's sexuality on an individual level, not just heteronormative. And especially with the ever-changing the way society sees sexuality and personally sexualities, like also with the LGBTQ plus community, I know that every day I'm learning about new terms or new things and new ideas, what's happening. And I think that is really important, especially like in 2020, even still we have people who are homophobic and things like that. And it's sad. I have a book out of the past that an uncle of mine blessed me with, and it's about how gay people, homosexuals and lesbians, and have been working discreetly in our governments, in our societies for years, and still now are suffering from discrimination and prejudice and things like that. And I think in talking about sexuality like so openly and things like that, why is it so hard for society to just be tolerant and accepting of someone else's sexuality? It's their choice, it is their body, it is their space. Why are we so determined to put them down because of what they choose and things like that? It's literally everybody has their own thing, but still this particular group of people are targeted on a daily basis.
Yeah, and I wish it was as simple as the way you phrased it. I really, really do. I think the real difficulty is that as human beings, we don't like difference. We don't like things to be different. And we've been told it should be like this. We're not born with that knowledge. We're not born with the view that X is bad or Y is wrong. We are born as a blank slate. And society teaches us that X is bad or Y is wrong. And, some of us are able to step out of that narrative and go, but why? What's wrong with that? But unfortunately, others are not able to step outside of it and are kind of, in the instance of, say, homophobia, are hell-bent on making their views and opinions known to the world. And we're all entitled to views and opinions. You don't have to think the same way that I do or view things in the same way that I do. But when it leads to stigmatization, when it leads to violence, when it leads to, unfortunately, in this country, we've got a massive problem with female corrective rape, which is, it's really interesting. I did a presentation when I was studying in Sydney a long time ago, doing my master's in sexology. I did a presentation on female corrective rape. Right. And I asked the audience, which was, there were a couple of South Africans, expats in the audience, but I asked the audience if they knew what this was, and they were like, rape in jail? I was like, nope, try again. They were like, rape while in custody? I was like, no, keep going. The shock on their faces when I explained to them that still, this was in gosh, this was in 2012. In 2012, that was happening in South Africa. Now it's 8 years later. That's still happening, where women are raped because men in their culture believe that by raping that woman, it will change their sexual orientation. Because being lesbian or having interest in both men and women is completely wrong, is completely taboo. So I think that as society, we don't, cultures as well, we don't like what's different from what we've been told. But again, that's something we are taught. Shame is a social construct. We don't get born with the ability to feel shame or to shame somebody. We learn that.
All right. Oh, that's terrible. Just one last thing. Well, take two more last things. For like listeners and viewers, do you for like say a little child who is in a household right now listening to this happen and thinking that they have these curiosities, these urges, or shall I say, and who they want to explore, and they aren't in the environment to do so, or they're just in the mental space of my family and my friends are going to look at me for being weird or mad or different. Well, what would you tell them as a sexologist? Because I mean, a lot of people, I think the young people struggle with identity in terms of sexuality and sexual orientation. So how can we not help them come out, help them feel okay, like that they have somewhere to go to, that they have somewhere to learn from, instead of not just being alone with their ideas and things like that? What would you tell someone to encourage them with their sexuality or sexual orientation?
I think, the internet is a blessing and a curse, but in this instance, it can be a blessing, because now in 2020, you have the ability to learn at your fingertips, and you can explore this idea of being attracted to someone or someone else through forums and through questions. And there are amazing communities online that you can connect with, but obviously there are also people within those communities with a very different agenda, unfortunately. But I think that the access that we do have to information helps to normalize this curiosity that we might have. Being curious around sex and sexuality is very normal, in terms of sexual development. If you think about this, the cliched idea of a little boy trying on his mom's high heels and lipstick, or a little girl. I remember I think I must have been about 3 or 4, and my mom was cutting my brother's hair, and I remember her telling her to cut my sideburns because she'd just cut my brother's, and her saying to me, that girls don't generally cut their hair there. And I said, I know, but I didn't say I know. I think I probably said, yeah, but he's got it. And so my mom said, okay, well, that's what you want. Cool, we'll do that. And so for my mom, it was really like, if that's what you want to do, if you want to wear blue and your brother wants to wear pink, or he wants to wear lipstick and you want to wear, construction boots, stereotypical male or female objects, go for it. And I think that having a safe person in your life, and I think sometimes that's difficult to establish who is safe and who is not, can also make a very, very big difference. But the internet can be used for real wonderful means to feel normal, to connect with people that feel like you, that know your what you're going through in your story. If I just think about, somebody who's born to realize that they're not the gender that they were born, or they were the gender that they were assigned at birth. 20 years ago, the ability to pop online and see celebrities who have transitioned was not there. Nowadays, it's super easy to do, and in South Africa as well. But unfortunately, again, culturally and societally, it's still not accepted. So massive roadblocks constantly faced.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you very much, Catriona. I thank you so much for your time. I just have really one last question to end everything off. I would love your opinion on sex education in South Africa. Like, are we doing enough? What else can we do? And what do you think is lacking? I know you mentioned like education and awareness, but how can we further make some changes for our young people? I mean, I thought maybe that my podcast sessions would help in some way, but what else can we do in terms of trying to inform more people, making them aware of the choices that they make and things like that, in terms of sexuality and permission and curiosity, and saying that those things are okay? What else can we do? Or is there...
Well, education programs have to include all of those things that you've just said. And look, the comprehensive sex education model that's now being kind of slowly integrated into life orientation at schools is better. It is better. But, you know, even then, parents were up in arms about, oh, you're going to promote that my child masturbates and you're going to do this. If I had my way, if I was not going to get any backlash from anxious parents, sex education models would focus. You know what I'd actually do? I would present sex education models based on the Dutch model, because the Dutch, if you look at the Dutch sex education models, which promote pleasure, joy, and consent, as opposed to the US or South African models, which promote danger and risk.
Wow.
Your outcome sexually, in terms of your development, the Dutch have a very positive outcome in terms of sexual development, whereas the US kids or South Africans, very negative. They did a study and asked they asked a group of Dutch teenage boys, what was the reason for their first sexual encounter? You know, why did they have their first sexual encounter? The reason that these boys said was because I had feelings for my partner. These are teenage boys. You do that same study, we take the same study to the US. What was the reason for the first sexual encounter? My friends were doing it. That's what everyone else does. I thought it was cool. I felt pressured. So for me, it would be providing kids with a comprehensive sex education that looks at consent, that looks at our bodies and our body functions, that looks at joy, that looks at pleasure, that looks at what can go wrong. You know, even as an 18, 20-year-old boy, you aren't going to get an erection every single time. Sometimes, you know, it is possible that your erections will fail you because that's your body. It doesn't mean anything. It just means that your body wasn't in it, perhaps, or your head was in another place. And for, you know, young girls to realize that the aim, actually for boys and girls to realize that the aim shouldn't be all about the orgasm, that we miss out on so much. You know, you mentioned the erogenous zones earlier. In terms of pleasure and touch of different parts of our bodies, it's not all about our genitals. So if I had my way, it would look like that. But unfortunately, this is not the case. Maybe one day.
One day, hopefully, our country will be progressive in terms of this sex education. Thank you very much. I hope so too. Thank you so much, Catriona. I truly appreciate your time here today. This episode will go live on Monday, the 7th of September.
Oh, wonderful. It's a pleasure. If anybody wants to reach out to me, they can find me on Instagram. It's Sexology with Catriona, with an O in it, Catriona. And my website, catrionaboffard.com. So I'm happy to take any questions that anybody's got. I'd always rather people ask me questions than ask Dr. Google, because Dr. Google doesn't have a medical qualification.
Yes. Thank you so